Excellent. Okay, thank you, James. And I am going to put the clock on. I'm going to try and do this in 15 minutes because I know there's beer out there and I would like to have a beer. Actually, Fitton told me that I could have had a beer when I was talking, and where's my beer? So, anyway, no, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It'll go real fast if I have a beer. So I've been kind of just hanging out in the M2M and IoT industry for probably the last year and a half to two, and I can frankly say London is the hotbed of the whole industry, and at least in Europe and in North America. There's so much going on here, so I'm really pleased that James put together the conference and that everyone came. But what I wanted to talk about is really, as we're building up this industry, and I really do believe we're building up this industry, and we're very early stages, that we need to learn from our history. And too often in tech, we think we want to create things brand new, but we can learn from kind of what happened. And I think in particular for us, for the Internet of Things, we can learn from how was the Internet created. And I think there's a lot of parallels that we could draw. And so what I thought, kind of like my friend Andy Piper, I'm not really a historian, but I wanted to kind of go back in history and look at some of the truths in creating the internet and see if we can draw some parallels from it. And so my sources are usually the tech blogs when I want the truth of history. So if you go back, who remembers 1999 when Tim Berners-Lee started his startup to take on AOL and CompuServe? Right? That was really important, I think. But then 1994, the VC started to kind of capture the imagination of this, right? And they funded Linux. So that $40 million for Linux to build the new internet operating system was really important, I think, to the history of the internet. But certainly when I think the money, the revenue started to flow in, when Apache kind of hit the $250 million, but they were on their way to being a billion-dollar company. It was great. It was a really important part. And I think the final thing, thank you. I think the final thing was when IBM in 2000, December 2000, announced they were going to spend $1 billion on Linux. That was a huge investment for IBM to make. And this actually is the only one that's true, right? And I'm going to talk why this is important. But I think what we can learn from the internet is open wins. That if you have the option of open standards and open technology, it's going to beat proprietary technology. Because back in the early days, CompuServe and AOL were very successful, very dominant companies. And they were beaten by openness. They were beaten by open standards and open source. So right now, the internet's run on basically Linux, Apache, and some W3C standards. So why is this? Why is this? What can we learn? And James, the kingmaker, right? So I think in the last 5 to 10 years, there's an important trend in technology adoption that's happened. And that's that it's no longer a top-down decision-making. It's very much bottoms-up. That developers have become so important in technology being adopted that if you have a developer community, your technology platform will become more pervasively adopted. And I think we're seeing this over and over again, that you need to attract the developers to your technology. And it's not to say that there's no top-down, but from the cost of doing business, you just don't have the time. The developers are basically doing the innovation. And so why? What's going on? Well, developers build cool shit. If they like your technology, they take it and they innovate on it. They build value on top of it. They experiment. They do things that you wouldn't have known that was possible. We see this all the time in open source at Eclipse, that people do stuff that, wow, we didn't know you could do that. And that's where the real creative juices come from, is the developers are really experimenting and pushing the limits. And that's where the innovation is coming from. But the other important thing is that they tell each other about it. They're very experienced in terms of showing off what they want to do. They write articles, they write resources, the tutorials. They help you kind of evangelize your technology. So they become a very important source of getting a technology broadly based, broadly accepted. So the next question is okay, so how do you win developers? And I think it really comes down to is open wins developers. When developers are actually out there experimenting, they are doing it in their free time. They have their full-time jobs, but then they're doing it in their free time. They don't have a lot of money. They're not going to go and pay a lot of money to buy hardware, buy expensive software to experiment. They're going to do this on their free time, so you need to have the lower barriers. And so open wins with the developers. And so I think what we've learned from the history is a combination of open source, open standards really attracts the developers. It lowers the barriers for you, and that's where you get the innovation. So where are we with IoT today? As I say, I've been kind of talking to lots of people in the last year and a half, 2 years, going to lots of events. Let me tell you, this is the first event where I'm not the only person not in the suit. Right? Most of the M2M events are telco-driven or standards-driven, and there's no developers there. Right? It's all high-level business shit, basically. And so it's kind of sad. There's not much of a developer community out there in the IoT community. And one of the things is that this is really fucking complicated. To put together a solution, you've got, it's been referred to in some of the previous presentations, you need to deal with the hardware, right? You need to deal with the telcos. Who's dealt with a telco here? Right? Yeah, yeah, just with your own phone, but I sat through a presentation by some VP from Deutsche Telekom who was bragging about how their partner program had been simplified to, it didn't take 4 months to join it, it only took 4 weeks to join the partner program. Like, it was just like, wow, that was an improvement, right? So, but from a technology perspective and the partner program, it's very complicated. So you gotta get all the data back to the backend servers, you gotta get into the ERP system, there's lots of moving parts here to deal with. And so I think what's happened is that people have solved that by having these very siloed solutions. So you get a lot of proprietary SDKs, you get a lot of vertical solutions that are out there that really aren't open. And it's really hard to extend them. It's really hard to innovate on them. And so where do we need to go? Where do we need to go as an industry? And I think if you again go back and look at the internet has some very core standards, open standards, and open source implementations of those standards, and then a number of very important frameworks or runtimes built on top of that. And they also have some developer tools like Eclipse. But around that, you have profit. You have a commercial ecosystem too. Like, saying open wins doesn't mean there's no profit. The commercial side is incredibly important for driving the monetary aspect of investment going back into that. But we need to get to an open ecosystem for IoT where you have basically the building blocks. So it's referred to in some of the other presentations today as some of the core infrastructure building blocks that you guys don't need to be worrying about, that you should be able to just source freely, use it in your commercial products, and then innovate on top of that. So I think we're going to get there. I think there's 3 trends that will get us to this vision of an open ecosystem. I think the developers are beginning to engage. Like I say, like this type of event is huge. Like, I don't think you can get this many people in a room dedicated to IoT, like real people, not suits, like real people, that actually doing things. You can't do that in many places around the world. But I think the developers are getting engaged. They are getting excited. This is cool stuff. They love it. Developers love hacking it and geeking out on it. So it's coming. But when they come, they're going to be looking for low barriers. They do this in their free time. They're going to be looking for the low barriers. They're not going to go up and sign up for a bunch of proprietary SDKs and try and figure out how to put it together. They're going to look for open source. Just look at GitHub. Like, open source is where people go first. The other thing that I think is huge, especially from a software perspective, enabling, is the open hardware. So things like the Raspberry Pis, the Arduinos, the BeagleBones, is just a huge opportunity for the community. And this is a driving, again, the barriers down. If you think about 5 years ago, you couldn't have an open source project that was targeting IoT. Because to run it, you'd have to go buy a proprietary board that's probably $1,000 just to test it out, right? Now you can actually just go out and buy a $50 BeagleBone and you're set. You're starting to test it out, and then your community can buy those. So open hardware is an important, a very important driver for pushing this forward. And then I think finally is the big data. A number of people have talked about the importance of data here. But I really believe when the IBMs, the Oracles, the SAPs, the big data vendors kind of wake up to this market and this industry, they're not going to do one-off technology integrations with different platform vendors. They're going to drive open standards. They're going to say, okay, we're going to support these standards to bring the data into our systems. And if you don't support them, then tough luck. You're not participating. So I think having this common platform around these standards would be really important, and I think big data would be driving it. So at Eclipse, we were actually building up a community like this. Fortunately, we're calling it m2m.eclipse.org. We've been really focusing on the hardware side, but we're essentially creating a community of open source projects. We have 11 different open source projects now, focused on building reference implementations of standards like MQTT. We're going to have a co-op implementation coming soon. We're building up frameworks for doing things like device gateways, device management, and then on the tooling side too. So it's coming. It's very exciting. It's great to see when the projects come, the collaboration that goes on in that space. And then finally, we do have a commercial ecosystem emerging around it, using this stuff. So companies like Telemetry, who's here, IBM, who's been huge in the space too, Sierra Wireless, Eurotech, BitReactive, and Exida. These companies are using and investing in building the technology. And so coming back to where IBM made the $1 billion announcement for Linux, right, is companies like IBM actually get the fact that you can build very successful commercial business on open source. That open source is actually how you drive a common adoption and a common platform across an industry, and then you build on top of that. And so we're going there. I think, kind of in conclusion, I think we need to learn and look from the history of the internet, how the internet grew, that open wins, and it really open wins the developers, and that the developers are going to drive this innovation.